All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to our webinar, everyone. My name is Justin D'Souza. I'm a quantitative specialist here at Statistics Solutions. I do apologize for the background noise. I'm traveling currently, so there might be some music that you hear, but I'll try and speak loud enough so that you can hear me. So today we're going to cover correlation tests, running and interpreting correlation tests. My colleague Sierra is going to provide some hyperlinks in the chat box. And if you have any questions, you can type questions into the Q&A box or the chat box. And we will send everyone a copy of the recording, as well as a copy of the PowerPoint. So I'll give a brief overview of the services that we provide at our company, Statistics Solutions. Then we'll dive into correlation tests, and I will provide a demonstration in our company software, Intellectus, in which we'll go through some sample data and kind of go through the interpretations for different correlations. Then I'll conclude with a summary and a Q&A session. On this slide, you can see the different components of the dissertation or thesis that we assist with. So we assign both methodologists and literature review specialists, depending on where you need help with the dissertation. We do hourly consulting as well as full packages for chapters on assistance. So if you have any questions about the services we provide, you can give us a call at 727-442-4290. So correlation tests are run when you're looking at the association between two variables. You usually don't have independent and dependent variables. You have two variables of interest. So this branches into parametric techniques and non-parametric techniques. This applies to almost every inferential analysis. If you're doing t-tests or ANOVAs, there are non-parametric alternatives to those tests. So parametric statistics are based on assumptions about where your population was derived from. Usually this assumption is that the data follows a normal distribution. I'm sure everyone has seen a bell-shaped curve before. So when you run parametric techniques, you need to have a bell-shaped distribution ideally. And parametric statistics usually involve the examination of continuous variables. That's an important note. Because there are three types of variables. You have continuous, you have nominal, and you have ordinal. So when you have a series of continuous variables, that usually allows you to run parametric techniques. Non-parametric statistics do not require a bell-shaped distribution. You don't need to have a normal bell-shaped curve necessarily to run these. And non-parametric techniques usually involve nominal or ordinal variables. We've done other webinars where we cover the differences between these. It's pretty foundational to understand what analysis you should select. But in general, a continuous variable is something that falls on a scale or a continuum. Usually it's a numeric value. And if you have decimals as possibilities, weight, height, things like that, or, test scores, then you can consider that to be a continuous variable. Nominal variables are more categorical. Gender, ethnicity, I want to say education level, but education is really more ordinal. Education goes in a hierarchy up, it could be multiple choice, high school, associate's, bachelor, PhD. That is more ordinal. A Likert scale is also considered ordinal. If you have strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree, that is considered an ordinal variable. So the selection of what type of analysis you go with is going to be dependent on what level of measurement you are looking at. So we'll dive into the most common approach. This is probably the most common two analyses used inferentially. So we have Pearson correlations, and Pearson correlations are the parametric technique. And these are used when you're looking at the association between two continuous level variables. So I have a spreadsheet. We will go through this as an example, and I have different car models. And if you wanted to look at the association between mileage of a car and its horsepower, these are both continuous variables. So you can do a Pearson correlation. The non-parametric alternative to these are Spearman and Kendall's tau correlations. So these are used when, for one thing, if normality is not supported on a Pearson correlation, then you can revert to a Spearman or Kendall's tau. These are used when you're looking at the association between two numeric variables. However, one of these variables is measured ordinally. So if we had, mileage categories instead of specific mileage, I can kind of illustrate this now. So here is the spreadsheet we will be looking at. And you can see that we have different car models: Mazda, Mercury, Honda, Toyota Corollas. And this would be a continuous variable, something like miles per gallon. And if you have the actual count, then this is a continuous variable. But if you stratified it or organized it into different categories like this, like 10 to 15 miles per gallon, 15.1 to 20 miles per gallon, and so forth, this is an ordinal variable because we don't have the exact mileage. We have a range, and that range increases. So this would be an ordinal variable. And something like engine type or transmission type, if a car is automatic or manual transmission, this is nominal. It's not numeric. It falls distinctly into one of these two categories. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through an example of this. Say we wanted to look at the association between miles per gallon and horsepower. This is Intellectus, by the way. This is our company software. You can upload a data file, and we have numerous formats that you can use: CSV, XLSX, SPSS, SAS, and Stata. And there are many data management functions you can do here. You can outliers, you can recode data, you can transform variables to different distributions. And you have plots. There are numerous plots that you can develop here. I'll show a couple examples of that. And then we have all the different types of analyses that you can run here. And Intellectus will provide you with an APA write-up, and it will tabulate and provide narrative for any analysis that you use. Before you even get to that point, assuming you don't have data yet, we have some methodology components here. Like we have a decision tree that can guide you in the right direction for what is the best test that you want to run. So say, in today's webinar, we're looking at examining relationships between variables. So I would select this option. That starts the decision tree. And then say we have scale variables. So we need to run a correlation test. And then we have data analysis plans here that go through, a sample research question. What should it look like? A definition of what each test is. The interpretation for these tests, what is a positive or negative correlation? What are the cutoffs for small, medium, large effects? Then we also have power analyses. So if you need to figure out what is the minimum sample size you need to target, you can use, a Pearson correlation here. And most researchers go with a medium effect size. So if you're doing a Pearson correlation, you need to collect at least 82 people, ideally, to run that test. Okay, so going back and going to hypothetically, say we're running, what is the association between miles per gallon on a car and the horsepower? The first thing you want to do is test for normality. There are many ways to do this. You can do it objectively with a test like a Kolmogorov-Smirnov or Shapiro-Wilk, or you can do it visually, looking at scatter plots. Today, we'll do it objectively. I'll use a Kolmogorov-Smirnov test. And what you do is you put in the variables of interest, miles per gallon and horsepower, calculate. And this is going to tell you, do miles per gallon and horsepower meet a normal distribution? And for this test, whenever you look at statistical results, a p-value being below 0.05 is generally a good thing. But for this test, it's actually not ideal. We want to have a non-significant result on this test, meaning we want a p-value greater than 0.05. And in this case, both miles per gallon and horsepower are greater than 0.05, meaning that these two variables do resemble a bell shape, which is perfect. gives us the ability to proceed with a Pearson correlation. So under the Pearson correlation family, we'll select this and then just put in miles per gallon and horsepower, confirm, calculate. Okay, so it's going to provide an APA write-up for you. We have a Pearson correlation is conducted for mileage and horsepower. It gives you cutoffs for what is a small, medium, or large effect. It tests for the assumption of linearity with the scatter plot. And then we have the results down here. So when you do a correlation, there are three things to interpret, specifically a Pearson correlation and a Spearman correlation. You look at the significance, and in this case, we do have a significant relationship between mileage and horsepower. The second thing you look at is the correlation coefficient, which is right here. The R is the correlation coefficient. And you compare this value to this citation right here, Cohen's standard. And he says that if coefficients are larger than 0.5, then we have a strong or large effect size. In this case, we have a large, strong relationship. The third thing you look at is the directionality. Do we have a positive or a negative correlation coefficient? In this example, we have a negative, meaning that as mileage on a car increases, the horsepower tends to decrease, which intuitively that makes sense. The more power you're exerting for the car, the less the mileage will be. So we have the scatter plot here, but you can also develop scatter plots in this tab under plots. And if you do miles per gallon, horsepower, see, we have a general trend here whereas mileage increases, horsepower does tend to decrease. And within here, you can change labels, you can edit the titles, change the X and Y axis, you can change the font sizes and the color. You know, according to APA, you shouldn't have color. So I would change it to grayscale usually. Okay, so that's an example of a Pearson correlation. A Spearman correlation is used, or a Kendall's tau. You know, these are kind of, the math is quite similar between these two. So you'll have to ask your committee if they have a preference. Both of these techniques apply. The Spearman correlation is used when you have an ordinal variable. Two variables, two numeric variables, but one is an ordinal measurement. So here, remember we discussed that mileage, this mileage variable is ordinal because we have mileage partitioned into groups. So same procedure, you go to analyses and then Spearman correlation, mileage, ordinal, and horsepower. And it's actually the same interpretation. Okay, so first it tests for a monotonic relationship, which is one of the assumptions of the Spearman correlation. The same citation applies for interpreting small, moderate, large effects. And again, we look at the three components. We have a significant relationship. How strong is the relationship and what is the directionality? Okay, we have a significant association. We have a strong association because the correlation is above 0.5. And we have a negative or inverse relationship. One variable increases, the other decreases. And when you look at correlations, this is why you don't need an independent and dependent variable. It's a two-way relationship. So as mileage increases, horsepower tends to decrease. Vice versa works as well. Horsepower increases, mileage tends to decrease. Okay, our next relationship correlation family. If you have a continuous variable and a dichotomous variable, you can run a point by serial correlation. That's something like if you had a relationship between transmission type of a car and mileage. Transmission type over here is nominal, and we only have two possibilities, automatic and manual. Okay, so you would go to point by serial. Your binary variable would be transmission type. And your scale, we can do mileage again. Okay, so this is going to tell you, if you have a manual car, you tend to have more mileage, and that is what we're seeing. Okay, we have a significant relationship. We have a positive correlation coefficient, and it gives you an interpretation here. So going to a manual category is associated with an increase in mileage, which is as intuitive. That makes sense. Personally, I don't really like running point by serial correlations because it doesn't tell you how the scores or the mileage fluctuates between the two groups. Instead, I would do a t-test because you have two groups and you want to look for differences between those groups. So personally, I would do a t-test. Independent sample t-test, mileage by transmission type. And this is going to give you a lot more detail. So technically you can run a point by serial, but I would do an independent t-test on this because it's going to give you the average mileage by transmission type. So we can see for an automatic car, the mileage was 17.15 miles, and for a manual transmission, it was 24.39 miles. So almost a 7-unit increase in mileage, and it's a significant difference. Much more detail here versus a point by serial. You don't get the averages. You don't get the average mileage by group. So I would do a t-test on this. And as we mentioned before, there are parametric and non-parametric techniques for a dichotomous and a ordinal or continuous variable. There is not a non-parametric for this. Instead, you could run a Mann-Whitney test. Okay, so an example of that. And Mann-Whitney is kind of like a t-test, but you're looking for differences as opposed to looking at relationships. So what you would do in this example, I would do, an ordinal variable like mileage, where we partitioned it into groups by transmission. Go to analyses, and this is a non-parametric family. And then you select a Mann-Whitney test. And when you hover your mouse over the terms, it tells you what they mean. Mann-Whitney tests for differences in an ordinal variable by a dichotomous variable. Dichotomous just means two group. Okay, so our dependent will be mileage ordinal, and our independent would be transmission. Okay, so we can see very similar. We do have a significant difference in mileage between an automatic car and a manual car. Similar interpretation. The final comparison we have is if you have two nominal or categorical variables. So something like transmission type and engine type. Neither of these are numeric. We have two categorical variables of interest. So what we can run here is a chi-square test. Okay? Chi-square test of independence. Variable 1, you could put engine type. And variable 2, transmission type. Okay, and just to illustrate, engine type was either V-shaped or a straight. And what we see here is that there is no significant difference or significant relationship between what type of engine is and the transmission type. Okay, and you can see we have all the analyses here, kind of a table of contents that you can adjust. You can shift things around in the order that you want them. You can also run descriptives if you wanted to just look at the averages for everything, miles per gallon, and mileage, horsepower, right? And Intellectus is going to know based on the level of measurement, what is the best way to present this? Okay, so we have mileage ordinal. It's going to give you frequencies for how many cars fell into each of these mileage categories. The 12 car models had 15.1 to 20 miles per gallon. We have transmission type. You can see there were 19 automatic, 13 manual. And for numeric variables, specifically continuous data, mileage will be presented as an average. So you can see the minimum, the maximum, and the average. So that pretty much covers correlations. The first thing you have to do is determine what level of measurement you're going to use. That's foundational. Then determine if your data follows a normal bell-shaped curve. Then you can pinpoint the analysis to address your research questions, use the decision tree over here. And then you can run your analysis in Intellectus. Okay, so do we have any questions? I did see someone had a question. So Intellectus from Alex, we have a question. Intellectus appears to be far easier compared to running these tests in R Studios, correct? Yeah, I completely agree. I tend to use R and SPSS if clients do request that, but Intellectus is far more efficient. It's more user-friendly, it's point and click, and it provides an APA write-up. I'll provide the hyperlink for this in the chat box. Do we have any other questions about the software or correlation tests? Yeah. We're going to send everyone a copy. Yes, we will be sending the slide deck and a copy of the webinar for everyone. So I did see some people join a little bit after, and these are all the different components that we assist with on the dissertation. Do we have any additional questions? All right, well, excellent. Thanks for joining, everyone. I'll be doing a webinar next Wednesday as well. And that one will be on verifying statistical assumptions. Okay, so we kind of touched on that today, checking for normality, but depending on what analysis done, there are different assumptions to verify, like linearity or homogeneity of variance. We will cover that next week. Alex, you said that you use R and SPSS. Can you explain further? Yeah, so depending on the needs of our clients, some clients need to have SPSS used. And that's the most common software that I use is SPSS. Many committees and colleges require that you use SPSS. Other committees, they don't have such strict requirements. So you can use R, you can use Stata, you can use Intellectus, as long as you generate your results. A lot of colleges don't care where you get the findings as long as you generate them. So this is SPSS, and everything we generated in Intellectus was double checked. Okay. All right, we'll keep us posted if you have any questions. Like I said, you can give us a call at this number at the bottom, 727-442-4290. And just let us know if we can be of assistance. Have a great evening.